You are live. This looks like we are live here on StreamYard. I'm going to look at the old YouTube channel and see if it's appearing up here for us. Yep. It looks like it's happening. All right. What's up, Copy Squad? It's your boy, Kyle Milligan, joined by Todd Brown today. Todd, what's going on, brother?
What's up, brother? You tell me, man. I like the gear you got. I like the look you got going on. It's like the, Miami Vice / I don't really care what you think of me / I'm about to pound a root beer look.
Yeah. So last podcast, thank you very much. It's very kind of you. As far as the look goes, it's a little bit all the above. It's about, you're down here in South Florida. It's about 110 degrees everywhere you go, plus humidity, unbearably hot. But also, so there's an aeration factor here. And also it is sort of like even this podcast is a metaphor for like a loosening up strategy, like literally unbuttoning. So something that I'm super stoked about having you on here is you're a passionate guy and you have a lot to say about things.
Oh boy.
And I just kind of like to know your story more. And like, again, and when I talk to you, or when I talk to you generally, it's sort of like you in front of a room talking at a room of people. And so it's like, we're gonna unpack.
So you want to? Are you really saying, Kyle, like you want to see what's behind the mystique, if there's anything, or if it's very shallow and very superficial?
Yeah, I just want to take a little part the beard and take a peek behind what you
it's
got
not
going
pretty.
on.
I can assure you, it's not pretty. And so, what do you want to know? You want me to give you the 60-second kind of where did Todd Brown come from? How did he arrive at this moment, or what? You tell me. I'm an open book, brother. There's nothing that you cannot ask me that I'm not willing to answer, man. It's a fire away.
That is cool. I think that is a great start, because I was actually thinking about this, because like we have a photo. I put a photo up on like Instagram, like you and me, and like on my YouTube and stuff. And I have a link to like your E5 program. And you've come a long way. Like you have. I want to say,
good?
like,
you mean in a good way? You've
been in the game for a long time. You've been in the game for a long time, and I started to wonder, like, because I'm looking at this picture of us on YouTube, and I'm looking at the picture of you on your sales page, and it's like, what was that come up like? Like you said, like, what's this thing like? Because I've been in it for like a handful of years. My beard has not yet gotten long and salt and peppery. One day, what was it like for you, man? When did shit start to click for you when you became?
Well, first,
like,
let me
Todd
say
Brown?
this, man. So you're asking when I became Todd Brown. That's such a let me back up for 1 second. And so, right, this is the chilled podcast. We're hanging out, we're just rapping, right? So first of all, so how old are you?
I am 33.
So you're 33. So you're a youngin', right? So you got to remember, man, I'm 50 years old. And so I've had a long journey filled with a lot of. So let me kind of back up for 1 second, just to give you some like legit context. I'm not going to give you the whole hero's journey spiel, but I'm going to tell you. So I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up like on the Jersey Shore. Right. And so, and I was always extremely small. So I was very tiny. I'm still short, obviously, as you know, but I was always very, very tiny. So like, I was like 80 some odd pounds when I went into high school. And so I was always kind of insecure, and I sucked at athletics. I was always kind of, I was quiet, but when I was alone with people, I would chatter. And I was a terrible student, more because like I didn't really care enough to be a good student. And I think I really back then thought that it would be cool to not be a good student, like to rebel and whatnot. And so it was only until I was in like my late teens when I started to weightlift to try to get like a little bigger. And I took to it, like my body took to it, and my body responded. And like the first year I put on a whole bunch of weight, and of good weight. And you'll see where this is going in a second. And And then I ended up years later, I ended up getting into competing. And it was competing in bodybuilding that really was the first time in my life that I started to excel at something. And I started to value, performing well. And so what ended up happening was around that time, and I graduated from high school, barely. I couldn't get into any college, so I ended up going to a community school. It took me 3 years to get a 2-year degree from a community school, and then I was finally able to get into a state school. And it took me another 3 years to graduate with a 4-year degree. So it took me 6 years total to get a 4-year degree. And of all things, I got the degree in nutrition. And so, first of all, why am I sharing this? I'm sharing this because despite being Todd Brown, whatever the heck that means in this small, tiny universe, I didn't read a full book until I was probably like 22. I didn't read a book cover to cover until I was like 22 years old. Until after, like, I was in bodybuilding and I was like, all right, let me learn something, man. Let me try to improve myself here.
So was that your first book? Your first book was like a bodybuilding nutrition book?
No. My first book cover to cover was a book by Dennis Waitley called The Psychology of Winning. And it is I have multiple copies. Actually, at a recent Top One, I have an extra copy for you. So even though it's like a $6 paperback today, because it's an old book, I have an extra copy for you. We gave them out at Top One recently. Anyway, it was like my first personal development book. And I ended up like loving it, reading it cover to cover. First time I read a book, like I said, cover to cover. And it really kind of opened my eyes to this idea of developing self-esteem and self-worth and positive expectation, right? And I liked it with body. Anyway, finally, college, got in, graduated. I graduated with a degree in nutrition, and the only job that I could get was at a local health club. And so I ended up starting at like $8.50 an hour at this health club, right? So college degree, $8.50 an hour. All of this is to show, first and foremost, a couple things. Number one, you don't need massive intellect you don't need to be a genius. You don't need to have a crazy IQ. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to do well as an entrepreneur. And then I worked at this health club company for years. And it was there that I was exposed to direct response, where I ended up getting a direct mail piece in the mail, an oversized postcard, a yellow postcard, oversized postcard, all copy. Never saw anything like that in my life. Knew nothing about marketing, selling, advertising. I thought marketing and advertising were the same thing. And then I just became a crazy student. I ended up asking my boss, can I expense this thing? Because it was a few $100s. Got it, devoured it. Called the dude on the phone who created this system. So this is going back like 20 years ago, right? Called this dude, said, who did you learn from? He said, Dan Kennedy and Gary Halbert. And so immediately I started studying Dan Kennedy and Gary Halbert.
We're in direct marketing. So you get this thing in the mail, right? Yeah. It's a big yellow postcard. What's it selling you exactly?
It's selling, it was like $350, and it was selling a home study kit for like fitness professionals on how to grow their business. And the funny thing, to show you how long ago this was, so when it arrived in the mail, it was like a big like manual, like a coil bound manual with like cassette tapes, a hard diskette, like just a bunch of stuff. And it was all ugly. Ironically, as a side note, I modeled my first product after that. So my first product was a bunch of cassettes and which was years later, and a big manual. And so I got this thing, this business growth marketing development system for fitness professionals. And I had to start to try to adapt it to the health club arena that I was in. But it was my first exposure to long form copy, to direct response, to salesmanship in print. And I was enamored, man. I was enamored really by the idea that you could create a single message one time and deliver it over and over and generate sales from that. That was like a whole new concept for me.
And you start seeing green at this point. Like you've been like it seems like you've been sort of like shooting in the dark a little bit up to this point, like just trying to just get ahead one step
I'm
in front of
like,
the
yeah,
other.
like, so you know, I'm making like $8, you know, $8.50 an hour. I started to kind of, you know, bodybuilding, personal, this psychology of winning. Now I start to grow with the company and I start to get promoted to these, you know, to some higher positions. I still really don't know what the heck I'm doing. I
Yeah.
meet my wife, you know, back then. And excuse me, we get married. I end up having 2 kids, 17 months apart, 2 girls. Wasn't planned that way. My first one was planned. The second one, we like to say, was a blessing, man. And I'm like, I got to do something because I'm not going to be able to take care of this, you know, I really did not want my wife to work. So one of the things that I was like, I don't want my wife to work. I want her to stay home with the kids. I don't want my kids in daycare. And so I was like, I got to do something. And so now I start to see this direct response. I'm like, this sounds amazing. Let me see if I can use this internally in the clubs with what I'm responsible for. And I was responsible ultimately for the personal trainers selling personal training to our members.
So
And
your move though, I think this is important because this is a romanticism about walking out on your job on a whim, jumping off a cliff and building this net on the way down to your last dollar. There's a, you know, I feel like that's subsided. There's been a rise of sort of anti-hustle culture over the last year or two.
Yeah.
But there was something about, like, especially when I started my YouTube channel, I was kind of like on the tail end of that, where it was just like, well, I got this thing in the mail. Now I'm going to be an entrepreneur. And that's not what you did. You started you used the skill, you used the cat, you cultivated this skill and you started using it inside this fitness center you worked at.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I'll actually, I totally agree with you, man. Like, I'm not, you know, I don't want to say I'm anti-hustle. Yeah, you know what? I would say, if I'm really being, you know, true, I'm kind of anti-hustle culture. I do believe that, you know, there is a time and a place where, you know, like, I've pulled all-nighters, you know, I have not, thank goodness, not in many, many years, but, you know, I've pulled all-nighters. I've worked, you know, 18-hour days when we were in the midst of launching something or when stuff had to be done. But I'm very much against the idea that, like, you know, you got to work 24/7 if you want to be successful. Because to me, working 24/7 in and of itself makes you not successful. Like, the aim is not to have to work 24/7. That sucks. Like, you know, that absolutely sucks, in my opinion, for me.
Yeah. I remember telling a mentor of mine, because he was explaining to me, like, he's like, here's how I look at my life. Like, he was giving me sort of his worldview. And he's like, if I'm worth, let's say, I'll throw a round number, $1 million a year or something. And he's like talking about, you know, how much per hour he generates. Like, it can move if he generates $600 every hour he works. And he's like maximizing. And I disagreed with him respectfully. I like to disagree with my mentors from time to time and just challenge their worldviews and way. And I told him essentially exactly what you're telling, because I had just read this book. You've probably read it, The E-Myth Revisited.
Sure.
Have you read
Gerber?
And it's this idea that, no, dude, like, the system is the solution. Like, I recognize that early in the YouTube game, where I was spending like 3 hours a day trying to do these little, like, pop-up 20-minute lives, but I was looking for topics and examples and keyword research. And I'd go through all my comments and see the last question someone would ask. And I'm like, oh, they asked this question, but I'm gonna need 3 examples to and next thing I knew, like, this idea of this totally cool passive income thing that YouTube was supposed to be turned into a second part-time job on top of my other job.
Yeah, man.
So
Yeah,
I'm
I
in the
get
same
it.
boat.
I think, you know, man, you know, what's it's so interesting, man. Like, let me tell you, to just kind of confirm what it is that you said about the you know, let me say this, actually, just right, because this is a chill podcast. We're just hanging. And so, you know, it's very early on. So look here, let me back up. So after I used the direct response skills. So first of all, I studied this thing, like this new home study kit that I got, like a fiend, man. Like, I was just blown away. And then I started using it internally in these health clubs to make more money in my department. And I had to adapt things and tweak things and change things. And what ended up happening was, I would say, probably over the next, I don't even remember, maybe 18 months, my department soared and became the poster child in this company. Like my department was doing like 3 million a year in this health club companies. We had multiple health clubs selling personal training services. And it was just incredible. That's when I got bit by the entrepreneurial bug. And I said to myself, and it's funny because what I said to myself was, let me see if I could take these skills and let me see if I could teach massage therapists how to grow their practice.
Why is it always massage therapists? SEO,
well, I'll tell you,
everything, like any marketing thing.
I'll tell you though, this is really why. So number one, I didn't want to do anything in the fitness world because I didn't want there to be a conflict of interest with my employer. I just felt like I owed it to them to, like, I don't want to do that. Like, right. So, but I also wanted something that I had a little affinity with. So in the health clubs, we worked with some massage therapists and chiropractors. And so I figured, okay, there's some affinity with massage therapists. And I think in the spirit of transparency, back then when I was first starting, I was a little intimidated by the idea of telling chiropractors, doctors, I shouldn't even do this, doctors, how to grow their practice.
Right.
And so I was like, massage therapists. So, but my aim, honestly, Kyle, was really back then was really like, let me just see if I can make an extra $1,000 a month. If I could make an extra $1,000 a month, I'll be thrilled. Like, that's how I felt. I was like, $1,000 a month of spending money, like on the side of my job, would be sick. And I was doing well at this job now at this point. So after those 18 months, when my department is producing like $3 million a year, and I'm getting a percentage of that 3 million, a small percentage, but a percentage.
So they bumped you a little higher than $8.
Well, because all of a sudden now they put me into a position where they were like, the majority of your compensation is going to be incentivized based on how much your department sells. And that's when I was like, okay, so wow, sky's the limit. So now it's up to me. So then, postcard, enamored, system, roll, adapt it, right? Boom, boom, boom. 18 months later, top of the world in this company, making a bunch of money. And now all of a sudden I'm like, let me see if I can use these skills outside of this job to just make $1,000 a month. Like, I was like, it was this combination of, it was less about the $1,000 a month and more about, let me see if I could use these skills to do that. Right. Cause that would be incredible. And so I ended up working with, I ended up launching, creating a product and releasing it for massage therapists. Now, the thing that I wanted to just confirm
is this project or product number 2
one
at this point? This is the first product.
This is my first real product. This is the first time that I had to have a friend help me to put up a website, like to sell this thing and
what year is this? Are we still in the 90s?
This could be, no, this is like, I think probably like 2001, maybe 2000, something like that, 2001-ish. The thing that I did was I woke up early to work on this business. I stayed up late to work on this business. I worked on the weekends, right? My kids, my little infant kids were with my wife, like outside, and I'm working on this, product and working on this, marketing thing. And so my focus back then was I really wanted to continue to do a great job for my employer because I owed it to them. I owed it to them.
A traditional mindset that I feel like is lost on a lot of us. This is something that me and Braddock talked about in the first one, like just showing respect for, specifically for us, Agora Financial and where we came from. Yeah. There's a lot of this sort of anti-boss culture. It's part of the hustle culture,
man. Like, that to me is just insane. It's like, look, they, I don't, for the most part, I mean, they gave you an opportunity, they extended an opportunity to you. And so, I'm just a big believer, man, in, you always do the right thing. Always do the right thing. I don't care, man. Like, at the end of the day, you walk away with your reputation, your character, right? And, character, is not, it's not flexible based on like your circumstance or your situation or whether your boss is a good person. It's about you and how you respond to those situations. So I wanted to honor that job. And so I worked my tail off, on the side and then I launched it. And then I worked that business on the side for like a year and a half before I left my job. And so it was really only when I got the business to be making almost what I was making per month before I was like, this is interesting. And for the longest time, I'll tell you, dude, I used to ask my dad, I used to say, because my dad was an entrepreneur. I said, Dad, like, how do you know when it's time to leave your job? Like, how do you know when it's time? Right. Which, like, such a, like an answer that really, or a question really that nobody can really tell you. Really, there is no like formula.
And good for you. Like, I think this is important is, what did your dad do? What was his entrepreneur thingy?
So my dad he's since passed away, but he was in the garment center in Manhattan. So selling like, dresses and women's sportswear, like a legitimate cutthroat mob run industry. He had no college, the funny thing is his parents had saved some money for him to go to college, like, a little bit of money. My dad was born and raised in the Bronx. So like a street guy for all intents and purposes. They saved some money for him to go to college. They gave it to him, sent him off to college. He spent it and came home 2 weeks later. So he didn't go to college. He spent the money. So they were like, now you got to
spend it on a good time. Like just having.
I hope. I'm assuming so. He never shared with me the details of that 2-week adventure, but he blew it, came home. My grandparents said, now you got to get a job. And so he wasn't qualified to do anything. And so there was an opportunity to kind of sell in this very street oriented, mob run industry called the Garment Center in Manhattan. And so that's what he did. And he did well with it. Like he did well with it. And so,
well, I want to pause there too. Cause like, I feel like here, listening to your story, listening to you talk, there's so much like pop culture. I don't want to call it pop culture. There's like pop culture, stupid word for it. It's like cultural, and there's things that you sort of take almost for granted. The things that you say in some of your experiences, like you don't consider them special. So I would say like, we're about a generation removed, I'm the next up and coming. And it's funny, your story, because mine's kind of similar where I was an accountant and I hated my job and I started writing novels and I was like, I'm going to sell. My goal was to make $300 a month and then move to Costa Rica. So I've always had like this idea, like this sort of South America thing, like this romanticism about doing kind of similar. Like, and my eye opening moment was I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I had to be 23. It was like the first book I sat down and just read. So around the same time, I'm an accountant. I hate my job. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and everything sort of flips and changes for me. But there is, parts of your story, they hark back to almost like a lost era where I heard this thing, I don't remember, some Confucius shit or something about like every man has two fathers. Like they get the father that they're born with and they spend like the rest of their life like seeking out like their sort of mentor father. And I feel like that's sort of become like an exacerbated state of the world at this time. So you have these things like, and I hate to just use like this very top of mind example right now. So like right now there's this guy, Andrew Tate, making a big buzz, like blowing up the internet, and everyone's saying it's like, oh, it's all these lost boys daddy. Like, and it's because I do believe, like, I'm listening to your story. It's like, hey man, I'm going to take care of my family. My wife's going to be taken care of. I'm going to provide. All right. I'm going to have my 2 girls at home, not doing daycare and stuff like that, where they're having like some sort of surrogate family that raises them. Yeah. Like the things that you're saying, again, I feel like you take it for granted. Like that's just your belief system. You didn't feel like you went out and sought them out. They were just programmed into you. But I'm sitting here as a 33-year-old dude, like these are all almost foreign, ancient concepts that I feel like a lot of people look at like the old way and like, it's old fashioned. Like it's almost like a bad thing. Like it's not progressive. And it's like, I wish, I remember when I first started like trying to do things on my own, I wish I had like a rich uncle or something, someone to say, just that question. When you asked that, the envy in my throat, when you said, I asked my dad, when's it time? Who the fuck do most of these people have to ask that question? Yeah. And so you get these like DMs on Instagram and on Facebook when you've done a couple things and you've gotten some success under your belt. And it's these guys who don't have like a rich uncle or a father who led the way and showed them the path. Like, I just find that like that's the stuff that I'm hearing from your story that I'm just like, wow, that's
Wow,
really
I
cool,
appreciate
man.
that, man. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to share something that I rarely talk about publicly in a little bit to kind of, I'll change the mood of the call in just a few minutes, but just for what it's worth. You said something, you said you said a lot of things so first of all, I'm blown away. I had no idea about your accounting background and then writing novels and Costa Rica. I'm blown away because, so Damien, I don't know if you know this. So for everybody listening, so Damien is, I've known Damien since he was about 16 years old. He is my best friend. He is family. He's the godfather to my youngest daughter. He's also my business partner, and he runs the company. He really runs the day-to-day. He's the head honcho. Well, he's a legit brilliant dude in that he got a full scholarship to Rutgers University, a full ride to Rutgers University, graduated number 1 in his class at Rutgers for what, of all things? For accounting. And then accounting. And he then decides, after he graduates number 1 in his class with a full ride in accounting, that he doesn't want to do accounting, right? That he doesn't want to do accounting. And he decides that what he wants to do is be a screenwriter. And so he began writing, and he's just a very talented dude in terms of he can paint, he can sculpt, he writes. For my 1 year for my birthday, he wrote me a mini novel about like 2 gorillas on 2 islands that like came together and became friends, a metaphor for our relationship. And then, he wasn't able to crack the nut on screenwriting and ended up getting into direct response. And so funny how, and the funny thing to put the cap on it to show how similar, when he got married, he spent 2 months in Costa Rica for his honeymoon. And so how similar you guys are, it's amazing. But to get back to the story. So yeah, I was, very blessed with my pop to be able to ask, to be able to go to him. And again, another guy who, my grandparents didn't, they didn't come from money or have money or anything like that. And so my dad, with no education, was able to kind of get into an industry, street level industry, and make something happen for himself, which was awesome. And so I said to him, I said, when is it time? Like, how do you know when it's time? Because I was agonizing over this, because I had like a great job and now I'm on top of the world in this company. I eventually was a VP in this company, making a lot of money, company vehicle, setting my own schedule. It was amazing. But yet I was like, what I always wanted, what always attracted me to being an entrepreneur was autonomy. I just said, I hated that my boss who was very good to me. They're great. Like, I still have a relationship with them to this day. I hated the idea that my boss could call me up at 7:00 at night and say, we need to have a meeting tomorrow at 7 a.m. And I needed to be there, and I needed to be, early and prepared. And, when he said jump, I had to say how high. And he wasn't doing anything or expecting anything from me that was out of the norm. I just was like, I want to get up when I want, do what I want with who, right? I want to be able to take off when I want, eat lunch when I want, work out when I want, blah, blah, blah. I don't want to have to answer to anybody. That was the main driver for me in becoming an entrepreneur. And so when I was looking at my job and I had this side business that was matching my income now, I was like, when is it time? And my dad said, you'll know in your heart when it's time. You'll know when it's time. And so eventually what had happened was, without getting too far into the weeds, my wife, her dad got sick and he was diagnosed with terminal emphysema. He was a smoker since he was like 15 years old. And so, smoking his whole life, terminal emphysema. He starts to deteriorate. He's now on oxygen, and we're waiting for the phone call like that he passes, right? Like, we're waiting for this call. Every time the phone rang, I always say my heart would sink. Like, please don't let this be the call. And then one day my wife, Kelly, is out walking on a Saturday and I get the call. Only It's not her dad. Her mom had a heart attack and passed away. And so now we have to, we go, ultimately we have to take care of her dad. We move her dad down by us. We set him up in a beautiful, like, assisted living facility right by us in Jersey. And 8 months later, he passed. And so this was prior, right? Like, so all of this, and I'm growing this business, I'm working this full-time gig. And so now my family moved from Jersey. My mom and dad moved from New Jersey to Florida, to Delray Beach.
Yeah.
And so we're like, what are we doing in New Jersey? We got 2 little kids. We got 2 infants, 2 toddlers.
On that note, shout out to the missus. Like, how important is she to like, behind every powerful man or whatever is like a strong woman or some sort of
She is the
like
most unbelievable human. Like, I'm so blessed and grateful, man, for my wife. And she is, she's the greatest blessing in my life. I mean, my kids are certainly an unbelievable, but I don't even know where I would be without my wife. I would probably be in jail, or I'd be dead or something. Who knows?
And it sounds like, you met somewhat young, right? Like,
yeah, very young. We met when I was 17 and she was 18.
And that was like one continuous sort of relationship. There was no on off.
No. I won't even, I'm embarrassed to say that, no, I was, an idiot, and,
you were 17.
I'm 17. I'm 18. I'm like,
okay.
And like, look, right. I'm 17. I'm 18. I'm 19. I'm on the Jersey Shore.
Well, and you have that chip, right? That little guy syndrome. Like, you've got
little guy syndrome, who's now
like
kind of, little guy syndrome, short guy, now jacked, competing, looking good now, right? And so, like an idiot, I think the cool thing to do is to have a lot of ladies, and so I hear about it, every now and then, to this day, from my wife. It comes up.
But at the same time, you guys have been together for such a long time. Again, this is another one of those amazing sort of like old school traditional sort of like mentalities. It's kind of come full circle now. Like, the cool thing is to be especially down here in South Florida. Ooh, I feel like I'm not going to say anything. Like,
Be careful. We're broadcasting live, buddy. Yeah, no, I mean, look, I think, I mean, obviously, from, 20 years old to, 30, 40 to now 50, your worldview changes, your perspective changes on life. What I value today is wildly different than what I used to value. What, my priorities have obviously shifted. And, a lot of it, you use the word earlier, which I think is so deep. We'll save it for another podcast, but worldview, and how you see the world, and, what is the kind of the benchmark, that you use for how you make decisions, right? Is it subjective based on situations, or do you have an objective kind of, standard that you use to run your life?
Oh man.
And so we'll save that for another.
Yeah. Like, that's a thing now. I feel like, I went to Peru with one of my writers this past week, and the experience there was quite eye-opening. And that's why you travel, I believe. You travel for basically, I mean, sure, you go to see sites. We didn't actually do that. We didn't go to Machu Picchu and go see all the tourist stuff. We just planted ourselves in Lima for about 5 days. And the point of that was, for me, was almost 100% perspective oriented. And I got all the perspective. And I say that because, we talked about like reinventing yourself, and I'm 33, right? I'm like you said, I was at the top one table at lunch one time, like on the last trip. And I was talking to everyone. I was like, wait a minute, how old is everyone? I realized everyone's 10 years older than me. And it's like, I am young, maybe at the bar I feel older, but at the top one, I feel like a youngin'. So, but we were talking about like reinventing yourself and getting new perspective. And I thought to myself, I feel like I'm on my 4th Kyle at this point. Like, I'm probably like, this is my 4th version of me. And I believe that you sort of shed your douchebag skin around 23 as how I was explaining it to one of my cousins as he was coming up around 21, 22. I was like, don't worry, you won't, in a couple of years, you won't be such a douchebag. Like, I feel like if you kind of like after like the age of 24, you start to like, sort of like, that's when you start to actually become an adult. But yeah, reinvention and like, I had some experiences like where, you know, this old expression, like life happens like for you, not to you.
Yeah.
So it's like I encourage anyone listening or otherwise, like get out of your bubble, go take some risks, and you're gonna make some stupid decisions, mistakes, might get yourself into some trouble. But I feel like doing that personally has been the like I could probably spend a couple hours to talk about the things that I experienced in Peru and the mindset shifts that gave me. Um, but I don't know how to explain it, man. I would just need all day. But yeah, it's just like
Yeah.
getting out, because we all get stuck in our routine. Like when you got a business and you got your like, this is what I do every day. I wake up. Like, do you have like your morning routine that you haven't broken in 11 years or something like that? You know,
Yeah.
like how do you grow?
Yeah. No, I mean, look, dude, I think, life is a funny journey, man. It's a journey. I think that it's, as you get older, you start to realize that it really is short. It really is very short and it goes quick. I mean, today, like my older daughter, like is, graduated from college. My younger daughter is in, her third year of college, second year of college. And so like, it's amazing how fast these things go. Before you know it, one of them's going to get married. I'm going to wind up being a grandfather in, hopefully 5, 8 years, something, who knows? It goes quick. And I think, we all, we evolve, man, we evolve. And so, but so check this out. So my wife is like, yeah, going back, my wife is like, yeah, let's let's go to Florida. Let's move to Florida
And
so
this is from the
that
Jersey to Florida.
from New Jersey to Florida, right? Because like business is now matching my income from the job. I'm on top of the world. Like it was the greatest job that a kid like me could have had. I was making a lot of money there and it was cool, but I was like, I want the autonomy. And we're in Jersey and now her mom and dad are passed. My mom and dad are in Florida. I'm like, what are we doing? We're alone, right? Like we would visit and, Delray Beach is beautiful. It's magnificent. I'd go back to Jersey in the middle of winter. Everything is gray and brown and dead. So we moved down to Florida and it was cool, man.
What's that like? You see it, it's all beautiful. Like, let's talk about your experience. You're here. Are you like, are you seeing stars? Are you like a child? Like, what's that like?
Well, so I had visited, like I vacationed in Florida a lot. And so I always loved Florida. I love the palm trees. I love the beach. I love the sun. I'll take the sun and the heat over the cold and the winters in New Jersey any day. And so I loved it. I love the fact that like Florida is just, South Florida where we are is, immaculately groomed year round,
Can I tell you a little story about that? Almost like I almost got
man.
2 stories on that. So this is when I knew I become bougie. Like I become Boca. I was back in, you got a Celsius energy there? Is that Celsius?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh, I am disclaimer. I'm a big investor in Celsius stock.
I love it, man. I love it. There's not a flavor that I don't like.
Oh, drink Celsius, everyone. Anyway, so
there you go. For Kyle, if you want a boost in energy and motivation, focus and concentration, Celsius, get yours now.
There you go. Available in like 100 flavors.
There you go.
I was back home in North Carolina. And so I grew up in a very rural town. My story is I was like the first of my family to like go to college. Oh man, imagine I go to college, I get the master's degree, I pass the CPA exams. This kid, no other college graduates to be seen. And then he says, you know what? I want to write a book, and I quit and I go back and live with my granny. And everyone's like, what happened? We had a good one. Like, so for like,
we were so close, Kyle. We were so close.
Now you're back at your granny's in the farm town. So yeah, a little while ago, I go back home and I'm driving down the highway and I seriously had this thought, like the voice in my head literally said, who is going to cut these ditches? This grass is so high. Like I was like, this is ugly. Like just driving down the highway. And I was like, I've been in Boca way too long. Every square inch is perfectly manicured. And
that's true.
So when I first moved here too, like I had like a King Arthur moment or Alexander moment or something like that. I'm not sure if this is why I asked you, because I actually had a bit of sadness about 6 months to a year in, because I'm always looking for the next goalpost. I'm always looking for how am I going to move up? And I realized this is where everyone comes. This is the destination. When you turn 50, 60, you retire, you move where I'm at. And I was 28. And I was like, what now? Like there was a moment of like, well, where could I possibly go from here? I am in the vacation paradise destination. That was a weird moment for me. I don't know if you ever. I mean,
look, I think no, I don't think that I had a moment like that. But what I would say is, is number one, man, like, and this is again a conversation for I think the next podcast we do. But why does there always have to be something else? Like you're in you're in paradise. You're in the vacation destination that people flock to get away from their lives. And so why does, like sometimes, like, look, man, you don't always have to move the goalpost. You can enjoy where the goalpost is now and be in the moment and love it and recognize like, right, like I've arrived. You don't always have to be on an adventure, always be looking for like, where's the next destination? There's nothing wrong, man. And I think that that's been ingrained in us, especially like online, especially with the, like it's all about goals and what's next and what's next and what's next. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with that, but I also don't think that you always have to be in what's next mode. And I think sometimes that what's next mode can rob you of the joy and the contentment that you can experience in where you're at right now. If you're constantly looking for where we're going next, it's hard to enjoy where you're at right now. And you're in a gorgeous place, dude. And so take it in, right? Walk outside and recognize, man, like how unbelievable is how blessed are we, man, to go outside and look at palm trees and the sun is shining and everything is green and gorgeous and the beach is right around the corner and like you could wear shorts and flip-flops year round, man. Like, I don't know. To me, I think sometimes you gotta, that's the proverbial stop and smell the roses, man, every now and then.
It's everything you're saying is accurate. Like I say that, especially when my friends visit. So I got friends, like I got family in like Illinois, Chicago area. I got friends in North Carolina from where I grew up, and all they want to go to the beach. They want to go to the beach. They come out and they're wearing their flower shirt and their swim trunks and flip flops and like, let's go to the beach. Let's go to the beach. And I'm like, sure, we'll get to it or something like that. And it's and there's always like this sort of like shock for them that and as I have to admit, like I've been here for 4 or 5 years now, and I've been to the beach maybe as many times as, and it's like it's always the good. It's I don't know. I remember when you and I met. What did I say I wanted to do? You said, "What do you want to do with your business?"
You were like, man, I want to storm the castle. I want to win. I want to be, I want to beat the henchman. I want to be the video game king.
Right. Okay. So that was the point. The point was stop and smell that's my metaphor for stop and smell the roses. Was I told you said, what do you, because like everybody does this. You got to have like a destination, right? Like what's your goalpost? Where's your destination? You always start there and then we'll devise a plan. And my plan was, and I told you this and you laughed at me. Like I said, I want to be able to, what was it? Guilt-free. I wanted to, without any guilt, play video games for 5 hours straight.
Right.
Like no noise in the background of my head. No, what should I be doing right now? I want to get that's part of the system is the solution kind of mentality is I want to get everything to a point where it's all automated. It's all, we got people in place. And if I sat down and picked up a PlayStation or Xbox controller for 5 hours, so it could be the beach. It could be the beach. I could just disappear to the beach and drink a bunch of like,
look, I think in all fairness, man, like, look, I think let me correct you and say that I didn't laugh at you. I laughed at your response. I found humor in it. But I think, look, for some people, it is, I want to be able to go to the beach every day. I want to be able to surf every day. I want to be able to play tennis every day. And for others, it could be, I want to play video games every other day or every day, right? Or for hours a day. And I don't think, like, look, to each his own. Everybody's got what it is that they want to do at different points in their life. The question, as you know, was really coming from, I just want to know what you want so I can ensure that we get it for you. Right. So that we can figure out like that, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think at the end of the day, man, everybody gets to choose how they want to live their life, as long as, right, here's the caveat, as long as they're not saying, I just want to be able to go out to dinner once a week and not have to look at the prices on the menu. And right, as long as they're not just saying that because they don't believe that they can have what it is that they really want and they're settling. If that's not settling and that's ultimately what somebody really wants, then to each his own, man. And I think everybody can live, everybody should live the life, man, that they're most inspired by or most, excited about, whatever that may look like, no matter how it may appear or feel to others who have different aspirations.
Did you, in your come ups, because I still deal with this even now, did you and do you deal with imposter syndrome at any specific points?
Sure. Most definitely. I think that I would say that I've probably dealt with imposter syndrome my entire journey up until now. At points, there are times now, because, that I have, some level of imposter syndrome. And I think that you've got to realize that, as you are on your journey, you're going to evolve. Right today, Kyle is known as one of the top copywriters, one of the best copywriting teachers and coaches out there. And so now you have you're at a different level. And so sometimes you can question, like, is that more about perception or is that reality? Is that more like, and so I think I think it's normal to always have some level of imposter syndrome. I think that there are fears. There are some fears that I have today that I didn't even have or that I didn't battle back then. And I wish
is it
that
too deep to share some of those or what those kind of look
like? In terms of business, I'll tell you that right now I am, when I release a campaign, a new offer, a new VSL or whatever it may be, you've got to remember that my stuff is under the microscope. And so it's not treated as just an ordinary campaign because now people are like, oh, this is Todd Brown, right? Now let's see, and so they'll pick apart the tiniest little thing because Todd Brown shouldn't be making this mistake or making this blunder. And so they'll rip it apart. So my stuff is under the microscope. And so that most certainly impacts my my thinking and sometimes how soon do I pull the trigger? Like when I was coming up, I'm very much a believer in get it out, take action and get the freaking campaign out the door, man. We can always improve it. We can always fix it. We can always tweak it. Right. We can always split test against it, but get it out the door. I very much valued speed. Like it was all about going from idea to implementation and execution and done in the shortest time possible. Even if it wasn't the A+ version of what I could do, I was all about get it out the door, make stuff happen quickly. Today, I would say that I'm probably, even though my skills are substantially improved since years ago, I would say that I'm probably more gun shy today because of the fact that because our stuff is under the microscope and also because there's pressure in performing even for my own team. So you got to remember, right? Like the team has this level of confidence in, Todd is the man. And I say that with quotes. Let's just write, Todd is the man and he's going to bring us to the promised land. And so now if I release a campaign and it's average and it's not great, I'm like, man, what's the team going to think? Are they going to be like, dang, is he losing his touch? Is it over? Is the ride done? Is the Midas touch gone or whatever? And
it's always like someone's waiting for you to fall off, or it feels at least internally like someone's like you. Has he washed up? Has he lost his touch?
Is
Was
it
that
is it
his?
done? Is it over? Is it all? And so, the point is really the lesson for everybody is like, look, fears and concerns and anxieties, they don't go away. They just evolve, they change.
Mhm,
And the
mhm,
reality is that I think, and this is an important lesson that, like the reality is that this is where and when, like you got to exhibit courage, and meaning that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is
mm,
stepping forward in spite of fear. And so, right, I have to push myself to let's Todd speed, get it out, right? Like it's okay if,
mhm.
there's, we get 10 messages today from somebody criticizing something, like meaning, you got to step out in spite of, fear.
Mm.
You got to take your foot off of first, man, to steal second. You know what I
Isn't it
mean? And
crazy
do
too?
it quick.
Because with like the size of your list and audience and your reach at this point, I don't know if you go through this, you maybe, I don't know if anyone can get rid of it, but like, because I'm in a very similar position where first off, the stuff is under a microscope. I don't know why, but I have like a curse of like, well, the people reading this are fans of mine. I feel like everyone goes through this. And so all I got to do is say, hey, that thing that you've always been wanting or asked for, I did it. Here it is. And
Yeah.
I don't put out a proper campaign. So my team and I are building those out more. You even,
Yeah.
you even rip,
Well,
you
you
even
know
rip one of my
what we
videos
talked
apart.
about.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, what we talked about was really
Yeah.
right. Like, look, if you're creating a back end campaign, right? Just to touch on marketing for 1 second. If
All
you're
right.
creating a back end campaign, ultimately a campaign for your house file, and let's even take it one step further and say that you're creating a campaign and an offer for buyers on your house file, right? Well, then cool, create it. You can create it based on that, based on the existing relationship and trust and prior value that you've delivered. But when you're trying to acquire buyers, none of those things exist, right?
Mhm.
And so you can't treat it like, well, I'm talking to fans, because the reality is that you're not talking to fans. And so you have to achieve a level of credibility, authority. You have to demonstrate proof. You have to demonstrate skills. And especially you, like, look, not to plant the seed for fear, a fear for you, but look, when I come across let's say a new offer for a copywriting training, let's just say, right? And
Mhm.
I'm an avid student of the market, and so I pay attention to what everybody is saying and how they're saying it. And so when I come across an offer from a copy coach on how to write copy, one of the very one of the biggest things that immediately stands out to me, and likely stands out to everybody else, is the quality of the copy that is in the message. And
Mhm.
so if the copy isn't that good, I'm like, well, what are the odds on this guy having copy chops to be able to teach people? Even if the offer is great, even if the campaign is great, even if they've got upsells and downsells and bumps and all this, and even if all the pieces are in place, right? So in other words, it's kind of like, if somebody's promising you that they can teach you copy, well, part of how they're judged is the quality of their copy. If somebody is teaching you, like how to, I would say for me, if somebody is teaching you, how to have a gorgeous green lawn, and you look at their house and their lawn is beat up and dead and busted, well, what's the likelihood that this person is going to be right? And even if that's not true, even if there's
Mhm.
no logic in that, right? Even if there's a fallacy in there, the reality is that's how we judge. And so
Mhm.
that's, that's so, as now I'm supposed to be the marketing guy, the customer acquisition guy, the messaging guy. Now
Mhm.
there's more pressure, but like, look, that's the nature of the beast, and you got to move forward. And at the end of the day, what you should care about most in your business are the response from the people that spend money with you. That's the truth.
Yeah.
We get the most complaints we get are from people that never bought a darn thing from us.
Yeah, that's the thing I was actually about to ask where I distracted myself is does it ever go like seeing like the negative that like you got this huge following and list, you got 10 thousands of people, and then you get this one guy that sends like this cutting message in this customer service box, and it's like it's like this email sucks. And it's like, what?
Yeah, I never, like, look, there are some things bother me. First of all, I don't see a whole lot of it anymore. I made sure that I don't have to see a whole lot of it. certain thing, the majority doesn't bother me, because really I feel bad for them when they're like, this is a scam. And I'm like, geez, man, like you have been so misled and so like you're missing out because you don't realize that while there are scams, not everything is a scam. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And so, most of the negative comments, like, I just feel bad for them when they're like, this is a scam. Sure. Yeah. Right. Blah, blah, blah. Or why would you share this if it was so good, and that kind of stuff. But the comments when people are like, and this is rare, thank goodness. But when people are like, that wasn't, that was poorly organized, or like, I think you could have done a better job of explaining X, that bothers me. That bothers me because it makes me feel like, right, they're not trying to attack me personally. They're not doing it out of, envy or anything like that. They're really just expressing a feeling that they had interacting with my stuff. And so sometimes it makes me question, could I have done a better job? Could I have gone even one step further to create a tool or a resource to make this even clearer for them? But look, dude, here's the reality. The reality is that not everybody is going to like you. Right. Your job isn't to get everybody to like you. Part of marketing is attracting and repelling at this, right? In order to attract a certain, you've got to repel, certain. And so
magnetism is about polarity. So you've got to you got to plant a flag. You can't be stuck in the middle, lukewarm. That's, oh man, there's so much.
You go to like Amazon, dude. Like go to Amazon and look at books that have a lot of reviews. What do you see? You see some, you'll see a lot of 5-star. You'll see with some 4-star, 3-star. You'll see a lot of 1-star or a couple 1-star in there and 2-star, right? Meaning that even with a great book or a great movie or a great whatever, great video game, there are always people that there are people that love it and people that hate it, and then people that fall somewhere in the middle. And that's okay. That's the nature of the beast. For the people that they don't like the New Jersey, attitude. They don't like my in your face, I'm just going to tell you like it is mentality. Okay. I'm not for you. If you want, I can recommend somebody else who's maybe a little softer or a little, gentler, if that's what you want. And that's okay. Your job isn't to try to be for everybody.
There was a moment at one of the top ones. We talk about creating emotional spikes. Like I don't know if I wasn't paying enough attention, but I remember this, like, it's like imprinted in my brain. It was when we were it wasn't last time, it was the time before. And you were talking about like your offer, like, and I felt a little guilty when you did it because you were so passionate. You said, is your offer like easy to use and implement? And right. you were on like your thing where like one of your like forehead veins starts to bulge a little bit. You were like, like you were talking and you were like, is it easy? Can they jump right in? Can they get success right away? And if they can't, fix it. And it was like, It filled the whole room in my head. Like, so. And I remember that because like the way it hit me, like, cause I was kind of like, well, mine could be easier. Mine could be this, mine could be this. And then you finished it with like that cataclysmic, like seismic, fix it. And I was just like, I
think, no, that's so funny, man. I'm glad that it, it resonated with you and stayed with you. Cause I think, and I was talking to somebody yesterday about this, that, I think, dude, that there's this weird mentality, especially online. And, I would say that it's really over the last handful of years, maybe 2-3 years. There are so many people that they're like, they think that like, if you got copy skills and you understand how to set up marketing campaigns and create a marketing message, like it should be easy to sell anything. Even if it's like a commodity, even if it's ordinary, even if it's not easy, it doesn't work quickly, it's not simple, it's inconsistent, like you can still sell it. And they don't realize like why, like sometimes I say to clients or students when they tell me what their thing is, and I'm like, why would somebody want that? Like, why do you think that? Why would somebody choose like, and you got to realize, like we all have to realize as entrepreneurs, like we're not marketing and selling in a vacuum. You know what I mean? Like, unless you've created a disruptive product, a disruptive technology, and you're the only provider of that thing that does, that provides a unique benefit, you're not marketing and selling in a vacuum. And so there are a lot of freaking options that people have. And so, like barely like the overwhelming majority of marketers and entrepreneurs have never spent the time thinking about like, why should they choose yours over every other option? Like, why? Because you're cooler, because you've been around longer, because yours is nicer, because you got more testimonials. Do you think that really today is really what moves people to say, dang, I got to get this. This thing sounds insane. That ain't it. And unless you understand how to meaningfully differentiate what it is that you've got, and then offer it to somebody with a no-brainer proposition, right? Like unless you can, meaningfully differentiate, show them that you've got a wildly attractive solution, meaning that it does work quickly, it is easy, it is consistent, it is safe, all those things that we talked about at top one. And then you wrap it in just a no-brainer proposition where, like, ideally what we're trying to do with our offers is propose something to somebody where they can honestly say, like, why wouldn't I do this? Like, why wouldn't I do this? The reality is that for most entrepreneurs and marketers, and I'll say that even some of the offers that come from my team, there are a lot of reasons that people can come up with for why not to do this. Right. Yeah. And that goes again, ultimately, like, and so the point being is that, and this is, again, a different conversation for a different day, but I think that so many entrepreneurs, Kyle, so many entrepreneurs, so many marketers, so many copywriters, they're trying to come up with the next latest and greatest whiz bang phrase, whiz bang headline. They're trying to come up with or find or discover the next latest and greatest conversion tactic because they're trying to compensate for an ugly solution that's wrapped in an ordinary proposition. And they're trying to compensate for that. They got an ugly solution, a commodity, a run-of-the-mill solution. It's not really wildly attractive. And their offer is nothing special, right? It's the typical pay me today, I'll give you the product. If you don't like it, return it, which is nothing special anymore. And so to compensate for that, they're trying to come up with this whiz-bang phrase. They're trying to use NLP. They're trying to use hypnotic language patterns. And they're trying to do all these things to compensate for that. And that's where you wind up with, and you know this better than anybody, that's when you wind up with this hyperbolic, exaggerated, bloated copy that's trying to make the ordinary sound extraordinary. And that's why people fail, because like you miss the whole point. The whole point isn't to try to use copy to sell a run-of-the-mill average product with a run-of-the-mill average offer. The whole purpose is to use copy to market and sell a great solution, an attractive solution with a great offer. Then it makes copy easy. Then you can just let that shine, right? Like, and so you see, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that copy, it's been distorted. It's now being wielded as a weapon in a way that is wildly different from what was intended, from the way that it was originally used.
This is and this is why that's your key Todd Brown right now. You're 10 out of 10 Todd Browning it over there, dude. Like
I gotta bring it down. I gotta,
No, you don't gotta bring it down. But this
I gotta bring it down, and let's go back to some fun stuff and talk about shenanigans.
Whenever like, that's what I was saying earlier. I was like, he's a passionate guy. I was like, I wonder if I ask him about like his life and his family and his friends and his come up. And but that's where I was like, he's going to bring some, like you guys say all the time, he's going to bring some heat. Like you were peak Todd Brown right there. If anyone sees you speak, if anyone goes to like top one, if anyone does, like that was like, boom. And I think a lot of the thing that you're saying, it reminds me of this expression that in human psychology, and we're talking about like leadership, influence, these kinds of things, not just copy and selling stuff, but the phrase that I see sometimes is like, you want to influence, not manipulate. And hyperbolic stuff is a manipulation tactic. What you want to do is persuade, not manipulate. Yeah. And to do that, oftentimes there has to be like some basis, some foundation. Like you say, it's a good solution. Like, this is actually really good. Let me kind of help you understand why. So a couple, like 2-3 questions did come in. These are a little bit more on the nose.
Really quick, hang on. So real quick, I just want to add something to that, and then let's take the question, and then I want to wrap up with I want to go back to a personal story that I alluded to earlier. I love
Open
what you just said. I love what you just said. And I like to say it in that, like, the way that I look at our approach to marketing is I try to lead, not push. Meaning, like, I'm in front, like, kind of leading them, like, kind of, leading them over to the book. I'm not pushing them from behind. And I think that when you have that mentality of leading them to want to buy rather than trying to push them to buy, the approach that you take is different. Like with my kids, I know that with, daughters in their, 20, 21, 22, I know that, like, kids, you try to push them to make a decision, they push back, right? So I don't want to push them to make a decision. I want to lead them to see the right decision for them. And that's a wildly different, different approach. Ultimately, you can get to the same destination, but the way that you get to that destination is wildly different. And so, yeah, but go ahead, fire away. You said some questions came in.
Now I feel like we're on some juicy stuff now, because this reminds me of like becoming a leader. So like, this is the kind of stuff I like to talk about. This is the whole mindset, that whole like paradigm stuff, because the paradigms that we carry are, again, we don't think about them. They just exist. And we just do. And those are the places where I feel like you really learn, because if you want to like reinvent yourself, if you want to like become a newer, better person. So this was like, I'll go a little personal. So like, say I go on 10 dates and I meet basically the same girl archetype, and we have the same conversation, and it ends the same way. And it always seems to be going so in a non-satisfactory direction. It took a minute for me to recognize and say, there has to be some personal role in this. Like either the conversation topics that I choose or the way that I begin, this sort of interaction. There's something that I'm doing that steers things. There's always the same conclusion, but I don't know what they are, because I think this is just how you talk to people. That's a paradigm. That's like, just like when someone says this, I say that. That's a habit. It's a routine. It's a program. It's like, well, when someone says this kind of thing, then I say that kind of thing. Yeah. And so you have these very cool paradigms, which again, some of them are like I call old-fashioned or traditional, that again, you probably take for granted. You don't think twice about it. This is how things are. This lead, not push thing is one of them. You just labeled it. And so there's a guy named Dr. David Hawkins that writes a lot about spirituality, vibrations, and meditation. He has this book called Power versus Force. I haven't read it, but I understand the concept. It's very much what you're saying. Power versus force. Having power versus forcing something. Yeah. Like you said, pushing. And so in his world of meditation, spirituality, and like emotional spectrums, like there's anger and pride, and these are force. And then there's power, which is like love, which is like you said, sort of like leading by example, like just being very generous, being in something. I think there's a couple different, like when you really get hanging out with enough masters and read enough books or study enough of the same topic, you realize that everyone has eventually reached the same exact conclusions with different labels. You see this across religions and philosophy. Like, there's a lot of overlap between Christianity and Buddhism and spirituality. They all basically end up at the same exact place with a different sort of figurehead or a label. But it's like, I am that I am. Like they all sort of say that like heaven is within. You create your reality. Everything that happens to you is sort of like a mirror of your inner realities. And it's like these sort of things exist. And if you have a wide enough breadth of experience and research and reading and stuff, you eventually start to recognize like, oh, this is what all the masters think. And this lead, not push thing is another one. Like Stephen Pressfield trained my sort of approach to my work ethic in life when I read The War of Art. Yeah. And I remember he had a line in there, and I can only remember like the synopsis of it was that he calls it the artist. You're the artist. We're the artist. Mm-hmm. He says the artist cannot reach back and help anyone up. And for me, that was a lifelong struggle as the guy in my family who went to college, as the dude who was always like super motivated. I had little man chip on the shoulder issues too, where I was going to be like number one at everything. And I saw like my friends weren't number one and I was like, I can help you be number one. And I remember like my whole life up until, like 25, whenever I read this line, I had always tried to be a fixer. I'd find someone who's down the dumps, look for the diamond in the rough kind of thing, and bring them up. And I read that line. He said, the artist cannot reach back and help anybody up. The best thing an artist can do is do the very best they can for themselves and do it in such a way that it inspires others to follow in their example. And that, when I read it in that book, that was my lead, not push moment, where I had to stop saying to my friends and family, like, you can be better. You're not doing enough. You don't work hard enough. Or like, and again, listen to the words that I'm saying. These are push. These are force, right? And instead, it's like, hey, when will we see you again? It's like, I got a thing coming up. I'll come back for Thanksgiving for sure, but I got to do this. My friend says, hey man, Call of Duty, the new Call of Duty just came out. I remember I texted this actual conversation. I said, yeah, dude, I think hit me up in like April. He's like, bro, it's February. I'm like, I know. I got to just take care of this thing real quick, you know? Yeah. And it's like, so those sorts of things, those dynamics, again, for you, it's pre-programmed. It might just be like automatic. This is just something you believe and you know it to be true in your head. There's a lot of people, I hope that me explaining it and like kind of like sharing it with it, help other people sort of recognize it, see their own patterns and paradigms, and try to improve and like start to pay attention to what they do and how they talk and how they behave on a daily basis so that they can evolve. Because for me, and I'm on my rant right now, some of the people that I hired and trained and worked with when I moved from like Agora to Wealth Press and I moved from a copywriter to a copy chief, these were people that were colleagues. They were coworkers, and now I'm their boss. And so a lot of the stuff that you said about my team looks up to me, to like you said, my team looks at me like I'm leading the way. I'm leading the charge. All of a sudden, there are dudes who used to sit beside me who are now like on the hierarchy. I tell them what to do, and I have to earn that every day. And again, so like I had to evolve as like a human being who went from like, when I used to get bad feedback from legal at Agora, I'd be like the first dude down the 808 basement, like throwing tables over and saying, this is horse shit. Like, and just like losing my cool every 20 minutes. And I had to become like this more.
I love it, man. I think you got a lot of wisdom for a young dude. I think that comes from from experience and a lot of introspection. You said something that I think is worthy of pointing out. Number one, you said you really like talking about leadership, and you just used the word, like you're talking about people, and you're talking about people and human beings. The difference between leadership and management and leadership are not the same thing. Management is the oversight of systems and processes. Leadership is all about people and pouring into people. And I think that probably one of the biggest shifts, I don't want to call it a shift because I just think it kind of maybe just expanded for me as I've gotten older, is just really recognizing the value in people, no matter their station or position in life, and not looking at, like not comparing anybody to the standard of a successful entrepreneur or the guru or whatever, but just looking for the good within other people and pouring into them. And like I've always wanted to, part of my, I don't want to call it legacy because that's a little lofty, but I always want people to walk away from time with me feeling better about themselves. Right? I don't want to talk about me. I'd rather talk about you. I don't want to talk about what I do well. I'd rather talk about what you do well, man. I don't want to talk about what I need. I'd rather talk about what you need. And I'd rather look for the good in you and talk about the good in you and make you feel good and edify you. I believe wholeheartedly in edification, in pouring into people. And so one of the things that I think, if I can say this, that makes me a good leader, like the people that I used to lead when I worked for the health club company. So you're now going way back, the health club company, they're still in communication. I get DMs from some of those people still to this day. They follow me on social media and comment and like. One of the things that made me a really good leader was that I recognized my job was to develop people. My job was almost a coach. And part of being a coach is to give people a greater self-esteem, to give people a greater self-worth. And part of that is reminding them of the good, of being their biggest cheerleader, of helping them to see the positive in themselves that they often don't see, and doing that repeatedly over and over, and being their biggest cheerleader, right? Doesn't mean that we don't have hard conversations, right? It actually makes the hard conversations that much easier, because after you've poured into somebody so much, right, they don't want to let you down. They don't want to disappoint you more than they don't want to disappoint themselves. I just want to say, right, like, and I believe that to me carries over to every part of my life, but specifically in business, right? Like, there are human beings on the other end of our house file. There are human beings. They're not a record in our CRM. They're not just a number. There are real people with real dreams, real goals, real aspirations, real fears, real families, real shortcomings. And we owe it to them to treat them with respect and honor, because they all deserve it. And so, right. And like, even with the, you could say the David Ogilvy, the prospect, she's not dumb, she's, your wife. That to me, it falls under that umbrella of, you're talking about freaking human beings. Don't try to pull the wool over their eyes. Don't try to use like fluff and shenanigans. Create something good. Put together a great solution, wrap it in a great proposition, right? And be real and honest with them and bring it out there. And that's when you'll freaking soar. You got to put people first. When you put profits first, and I have friends, man, that they're like, they don't care. Like I have close friends that I love and respect and appreciate, that have wildly different worldviews than I do, in that they're like, it's so what, he's my friend, right? I'm going to compete against him, or I'm going to put something out that might hurt his business. For me, see, I wouldn't do that. I'd never do that. I'd never do that, right? Why? Because people come first to me, because I respect and honor my friendship much more than I do a check for any amount of money. I don't care, man. Right. And the same thing with that. Like, look, I've in some instances, I've made less because I've not been willing to put out a product that I did not believe was in the best interest of our people. Right. And so I believe it's about people first. I also believe, in the spirit of transparency, that that's good business. And so I believe that attitude is not only the right attitude, but it will also lead to greater business success. And so does that make sense, man?
Oh God. Yeah. I think the thing is too, it's like, it's so difficult because yours is a philosophy. It's a compounding philosophy. Yours is a philosophy of relationships and those dynamics, versus this profit first sort of philosophy. The results are tangible and they're immediate.
Yeah.
And so for you probably don't have a spreadsheet of everybody you've ever met and all the favors they've done for you, known and unknown, that are actually the result of these relationships that you've built, that you can't.
I have, look, if I wanted to, I have a lot of checks that I can cash. I have a lot of favors that I could call in, but that's not, to me, what it's about, man. Like, that's cool and that's great. And, and I'm not bashing anybody that runs their life that way. To each his own. That's not the way that I run my life. And, I've always, at the end of the day, man, I want to be able to lay my head on my pillow at night and know that I've done good. I want to lay my head on my pillow at night and know that if all of my clients and all of my customers got together in a room alone without me there, a big, gigantic room, for an hour before I walked in, that nobody would be like, wait, Todd charged you this and Todd charged me this, or he gave you this bonus and I didn't get that bonus, or there's right. I want to lay my head on my pillow at night and know that there's not Better Business Bureau issues out there, chronic issues out there. I want to lay my head on my pillow at night and know that if somebody searches my name, right, that they're going to find a heck of a lot more good than they will bad. I want to lay my head on my pillow at night and I want to know that, right, that if my kids search my name one day, that what they'll find is a heck of a lot more praise than anything else. And to me, those things are important. My reputation, my character, my word, right, and my relationships are, to me, at the end of the day, everything. And so, the idea of, and I'm not saying, by no means, let me make sure that I'm crystal clear on this. I don't run a nonprofit. And so, right, I'm not here. I don't run a charity, right? I love making money. Granted, I live a very conservative, life. Like I don't drive a Lambo by choice. I drive a Dodge Ram pickup truck. I have a beautiful home, but so don't get me wrong, right? I'm no angel, right? But I do put other things far ahead of how much money is this going to make me? And great, I'll do this dude a favor because I know that in 3 weeks, I'm now going to call him up and ask him to do me a favor. And I just don't work that way, man. And maybe, look, that could be a to my detriment sometimes, but I'm okay with that, right? From a pure business and problem, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, that's the trade-off, right? Like, there's a trusting and generous person. You open yourself to, you become vulnerable. You become someone who can be taken advantage of. Because I've been on that too. But at the same time, I want to tell this story because I think it's very powerful. It was powerful for me to experience it, which is pouring into people. So my team is basically people that I adore as humans, and I start there. And I basically, because I do feel like my copy process is very systematized, that I can teach almost anyone with the right ethic and character to become a great copywriter. Something that's crazy you said, like one of my writers hit me up yesterday, the day before, and it just sent me this sweet line of messages, like about everything that I taught him like a year or two ago. It's paying dividends. I'm reading it right now. It's paying dividends. You instilled an important ethic in me. Only now I see how important it is. Wow. So it's like, again, I sort of like, these are the practices, and these are the practices is how we approach our craft. And I get one of those calls. So I actually had one of those experiences on Thursday. I see a guy in person. So I'm a very, when we get to the draft, when we get to the copy, we're professionals. Like, that's it. We're not buddies at that point. We're professionals. And so he submitted some subpar work, and I let him know. Because too, like, I would need to like have those hard conversations that you're talking about, where it's like, you have to understand, I'm not going to go easy on you because we're buddies here. Like, you cannot mail it in on me. I will not allow it. And so I was nervous about the next time I saw him because I was very stern. And he said, I want to talk to you about that feedback. And I was like, all right. And he said, I just want to let you know, like, I really respect it. He said, I sent in what I sent in, and I just respect, like, you just absolutely wouldn't take it. And he says, I just think it says a lot about like how you run stuff. And I like, it was a great reminder about why I follow you and why I respect you so much. He's like, I'm glad you did that. And it was kind of crazy, like, because like I was so nervous. I was like, this guy's gonna, I feel like any moment I'm gonna break his spirit because I'm being so firm with him. He's gonna quit on me. And it's like, but it was actually the opposite, because I think it comes from a place of, I try to, like you said, pour into people, empower the team. And like, I try not to write much of our copy anymore. Instead, I want to let everyone else sort of like run the show, run the business. I want to have a business in a box. That's why I changed from Kyle the writer to Copy Squad. I don't want it to Kyle Squad. I want it to have my team doing the majority of our campaigns, our emails. I'll still do and fulfill the products, but I believe in that whole pour into people thing as well. I just think it's a slower burn, and you do have to go through some 6-month painful, like, because when you're doing it that way, when you're pouring into people, first off, you always blame yourself when things go wrong, because you're like, how could I have trained them better? How could I have been more like whatever? And then after like 6 to 12 months, you're like, it's not working. And so now you got all this investment, you poured yourself into them. You're blaming yourself all the while if you're anything like me, if they're not successful. And then you got to decide that this is not going to, that's probably one of the hardest parts.
Well, look, man, I think, a couple things. Number one, you are responsible, right? Like the owner, the business owner, the entrepreneur is responsible, right? Because you're responsible, regardless of whether you take the mentality or approach or philosophy of pouring into people, you are responsible. Look, ultimately you hired them, you onboarded them, you trained them or had them trained, you equipped them with the systems. Maybe they were the wrong hire. Therefore, it's your fault for hiring them. Maybe you onboarded them or incorrectly, or maybe your onboarding system that somebody else used choose to onboard them was weak. Regardless, you are responsible. I'll tell you, in line with that, where that comes from for me. So years ago, when I was at the health club company, and 9/11 happened. And after 9/11, Rudy Giuliani, when he was still somewhat respected, wrote a book on leadership. And the one thing that I remember from that leadership book was Rudy Giuliani said he had a plaque, like a placard on his desk that he looked at every day. And the placard had 2 words. And those 2 words were, "I'm responsible." And the reality is that if you have somebody on your team who robs from you, you're responsible because you hired them. Maybe you didn't vet them correctly. Maybe you didn't interview them correctly. You are responsible ultimately. And so I think, look, pouring into people, I want to be crystal clear. This doesn't mean that you don't hold people accountable. This doesn't mean that you're not firm and strict and sometimes brutal with people. Like, I'm not saying that you avoid the difficult conversations. I believe that the difficult conversations are as valuable as the edifying when you're doing it from the right place, when you're doing it because you care enough about the person, about the team, about the business, right, to say what needs to be said. Often the reality is the most difficult conversations to have are usually the most important ones to have with a team member. Right? The ones that the typical leader or manager avoids having are usually the most important ones to have. But if you view it in the light of it's all about their development, their growth, because you're a coach, coaches don't only say positive things. Coaches say what needs to be said in the best interest of their person. And I think, Kyle, I think one other thing, I'm going to say one other thing, tell you a story, and then I'm going to, let's wrap it. And so, look, I think another one of my kind of philosophies, if you will, or part of my worldview as it relates to my business, I guess you could say, is, and I believe that anybody and everybody can have this same perspective. And that is, and this goes back to something you said, that I believe that, and I operate this way, that the business that we are in is the business of changing lives. The vehicle, the tool that we happen to use to do that is improved marketing. In other words, I'm in the business of changing the lives of entrepreneurs. I want to give them more autonomy, more control, more freedom, and more money, so that they can do X, Y, and Z, whatever is most important to them, so they can send their kids to private school, so they can move into a better neighborhood and a better house, so they can have their spouse stop working, so they can finally get a better car, a safer car, so that they can get themselves health insurance, so that they can finally live the life of their dreams or whatever it is, right? And so, right, that's the business that I'm in. I believe that I'm in that business, and I just happen to use marketing, our E5 method and system, and our products and programs to do that. And so when you take that perspective, right, so I'm not in the business of merely teaching marketing. That's the vehicle that I use, that I happen to be fairly skilled at to change lives. And I think because of that perspective, and because I've drilled that perspective into my team, it's become a part of our culture. It carries through to the way that we approach every circumstance and every opportunity. This is why I'm able to look at opportunities to partner with people and say, nah, because I don't believe that it is going to impact in a positive way the lives of the people that we serve. Or do certain policies in the company, are they only good for the company and not good for the tribe, right? Well, is there a happy medium that we can find? And so I think that is wildly important, and it dictates how and why we do what we do. A story for you. And so I told you earlier that I was going to change the mood of the call, and I am. But I am going to, but I think that it's valuable. It's important enough to share with folks. So I moved to Florida, moved the family to Florida. And my pops, my mom and dad are, 15 minutes away. They're in Delray. And so it's awesome, man. I start to see them more. And, my dad is now retired, like successful dude, retired. And so I get to like go out to breakfast with him once a week. So we meet at this little breakfast joint in the middle of our, in between us, like on Fridays, and we just chat. We chat about business, we chat about life, and blah blah blah, all this stuff. And my dad's doing whatever it is that he wants to do every day. I got some crazy stories that I can tell you. Actually, I'll tell you a crazy story. Okay. I'll tell you a crazy story real quick, and then I'm going to come back to this main story. So you got to remember, I said my dad was grew up in the Bronx on the street. My dad was in the doo-wop era. Most of your people don't even know listening what the heck doo-wop is. Go to Spotify, listen. Worked in this, like I said, mob run garment center. So now he's an older guy, he's retired, he's down here, and he wants to have like a screen. He wants to have his screen enclosure in his backyard around the pool fixed, repaired. And so somehow he gets introduced to this dude who will do it. And so the guy basically tells my dad like that, gives my dad some kind of sob story on the phone, says, whatever, my girlfriend is sick. I got to go to Colombia to take care of her. Would you mind, paying me in advance for the screen, so that I can blah, 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 because this guy is, he's a manual labor worker dude. My dad, out of the kindness of his heart, feeling terrible for this guy, pays him in advance. Like, I don't even know how he got, PayPal'd him or something, whatever, gave this guy the money in advance. So my dad now the guy disappears. He ghosts my dad. And so my dad is a street guy. And so now my dad feels like he was just beat. Like he just got beat. But like my dad said to me, he's like, I almost feel like I was just, like I've lost a step. Like I was just scammed, but my dad was like, I was just beat by this dude. So it's eating my dad up. My wife sees it. She figures out how to, like, she asked my dad for this dude's cell phone number. She messages the guy and pretends to be somebody interested in having screen work done. Right now, the guy's supposed to be in Colombia taking care of his girlfriend. So my wife says, would you be available to meet me today to talk about my screen? The guy says, sure, I'll come over in 20 minutes. Now, the guy told my dad that he was in Colombia now, right? He got the money from my dad, ghost my dad. So my wife says to the guy, you can meet us, at XYZ, area, whatever. I forgot. She had the guy meet us like right by our house. And so now so now we go over there. My dad is like off to the side so the guy can't see. Dude shows up on his bike with like screen in the basket on the front of the bike. And so the guy shows up, and the moment that the guy shows up, he pulls up on his bike, like little dude. My dad walks over to
bicycle, not a motorcycle.
Bicycle. No, bicycle. This guy doesn't have, excuse me, and I share this with, the guy doesn't have a pot to pee in, man, this dude. Right. Right? Like he's a manual labor dude who just basically thought that he beat an old dude. My dad walks over, and I told my dad specifically, I said, please do me a favor and remain calm, right? And my dad's like, no, of course. Like, and so my dad walks over there immediately. From moment one, he opens up his mouth. I don't even remember what comes out of his mouth, but the dude on the bike, my dad is like, you remember me, right? And the dude now is shaking, visibly shaking. My dad looks at me and goes, grab him and put him in the back of the car. I said, Dad, I ain't putting him in any car. Are you out of your freaking mind? Like, are you nuts? I'm not putting the guy anywhere, right? Like, this was my dad, the Bronx coming out in. My dad looks at me, this old guy, this poor freaking dude is on his bike. Granted, to me, this poor dude's on the bicycle. He's shivering. My dad is, dropping F-bombs. Todd, grab him, put him in the back of the car. I ain't putting him in any car. Are you freaking nuts? And my wife then settles everybody down. Long story real short, my dad got his money back, and all was good. But right, every now and then, sometimes our old nature flares up. And so going back now to the main story. So going out. Yeah, just a random tangent, just to give you a glimpse into the old man. And so I get together with him, and then my dad, he he started to deal with anxiety. And for some reason, he was dealing with anxiety, and he was dealing with depression. And I remember, we started to have deep conversations about this anxiety and depression. And he just started to deteriorate. And he started to go get some therapy, and then they tried some medication, and he was just continuing to get worse. He was losing weight, and then one day, I'll never forget, I'm in my house, my other house, and I had this little nook in the corner of my bedroom, and it had like a TV in it and a couch. And I'm sitting there. I don't remember. It was like the afternoon, and my phone rings, and I see that it's my mom. And so I'm like, so I answer the phone, and I'm like, hey, Mom, is everything okay? And she says to me, Daddy hung himself. And he took his life. My dad, who was wildly successful, street dude, got it done, but yet took his life. And that's, the tattoo on my arm, only God knows why, 4/15/14 was when my dad passed on that day. I share that for two reasons, man. One is that, obviously for anybody that is struggling with anything, right, there is no shame in asking for help. There's power in being willing to be vulnerable and reach out and get help and talk to somebody. The impact on those around somebody that commits suicide is unbelievable, right? It was, 6 months after my dad passed, I had a heart attack that they couldn't figure out why. I like to say, man, I don't know, broken heart. I don't know. And so number one is, if you're struggling with anything, reach out. You reach out to me personally. I'd be more than happy to chat with you. The second reason is because you'll come across trials, man. My wife lost her mom, lost her dad. I lost my dad, had a heart attack. Trials happen. Life is not easy. It's what you do in the face of those moments that will define your life. It's the attitude that you choose to take. Everybody deals with things, right? People see Todd Brown and think, had to have it easy, man. Like, started with connections, started with money. I didn't start with any connections. I launched my business with $850. I worked a full-time job while I was working this side business in the morning and an evening and on weekends while I had 2 toddlers at home. And I did it for 18 months before I ever even left that job, right? And people don't understand, like, I've been doing this for 2 decades at this point, and right, and faced obstacles along the way. Everybody will. It's what you do in those moments that define who you are and define your life. It's what you choose to do and how you choose to approach those moments that determine who you are, what you become at your core. That's when you got to rise up and step up, right? Because life is going to throw curveballs your way. What you do with them, that determines everything.
Do you think
brother?
That's, first off, I mean, I guess, thank you for sharing that story. And I say thank you because, obviously you didn't have to open that door. So I appreciate that you did. I feel like honored that you would that we'd share that. And I think that message is so powerful. And I think in the space that we operate in, and again, this is, not to tie it all back to marketing, but in the culture and the zeitgeist and the mentality that it takes to do what we do, to want to embody this entrepreneur thing. And then I can testify, like when I go to Top One meetings. So for folks who don't know, Top One is Todd's mastermind. And we sit down and someone's like, yeah, I just had this $2 million day yesterday. And I'm like, well, my YouTube just hit 10,000 subscribers. So it's like, there's always, people are celebrating their victories. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of ego. And there's a lot of that. So it's very easy. And then even just like if you're a teenager now and there's Instagram, there is a lot of this sort of comparative nature that I feel like facilitates depression, if not outright causes it or exacerbates it. I think so. This is like a real conversation. I think it's especially pronounced in the space that we operate in. I also don't do the thing where I go, like you mentioned earlier, I don't drive a Lambo. You said I don't think I could afford a Lambo. Like, I don't think I would be able to like part ways with that kind of money regularly. I think you have to lease those, or maybe, I don't know. But I also choose not to be the flash guy on like social media and because it feels like a big false sort of like carousel of like all your highlights and your best moments. So I also want to like point out like that. I want to ask you a little bit, because this, I think, so in 2022, and one of the reasons why I visited Peru has been for me an especially traumatic year. I've had a bunch of setbacks, which have ultimately led to me trying to step outside of my box. I started taking Muay Thai. I started taking like salsa lessons. I decided to start a podcast where I could loosen up and be less marketing and more real. And, so I've had a bunch of, and what's funny, Todd, two of my, maybe three of them now always happen like a week before I see you. So I'll tell you about that maybe off camera at some point. But like,
you'll have to tell me when we're in Orlando in a few weeks.
Yeah, I'll tell you about them. I feel like there's some things that I've been waiting for the right time, and I'll tell you a little bit more. But I feel like one of the things that as I do, so I was talking to a girl. How do I describe some of this stuff without going too close? Someone went through something similar to me, okay? And her response was so different from mine, especially as a guy who sort of blames himself for everything, takes responsibility, says, well, that's all my fault anyway. That's because of who I am, what I'm about, and the things like that. Some of the things that I keep hearing, one of the things that one of my friends literally told me when he caught up with me like a month or two later, and he's like, how are you doing? And I was like, you really? So I told him, and he's like, holy shit, brother, I didn't know you were suffering. He says, I've always known you to be such a strong person. I never even thought to reach out. Right? So like, there's that. Like, there's also that, like you said, about being comfortable reaching out for help, talking about your situation, stuff like that. There are people, like, especially if you're a charismatic person, if you're a confident person, people might not even think, you feel those sorts of, you have that
you
sort
have
of
no idea what,
yeah.
People, you have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. There are a lot of people, like, I never in a million years would have thought that that my dad would have done that. I not even in a million, somebody else's family, somebody else, some other guy, never. And so you have no idea what is going on behind the scenes. Certainly you can't use social media for anything, because there are, like, I've known people that if you looked at their social media, you would think that their life is flawless. Meanwhile, right, their life is falling apart. And so you have no idea. The other thing I just want to address, I would kick myself if I didn't, is, you said something that your buddy said. He said, like when he said, I had no idea you were struggling. He said something like, I always looked at you as a very strong person. Suffering and strength and being a strong person have nothing to do with each other. In other words, there is this weird, there's this weird stigma. There's this negative association that if you're struggling with depression, or anxiety disorder, that is a weakness, right? The reality is this: what most people don't understand, and I don't want to go too deep into this now, but what most people don't understand, dude, is that, it's one thing when somebody gets anxious, right? Like our body is designed with fight or flight chemicals to, right? Like in a serious situation to have some, to be anxious or to be saddened. But there's a difference between being anxious in a moment or having some sadness in a moment, and suffering with depression. And suffering with depression, what most people don't understand that have never dealt with any kind of, mental health issue is that the depression comes from like a depression disorder comes from a chemical issue in the body, very similar to the way like when somebody has diabetes. It amazes me, these ignorant people that talk about, oh man, these people are depressed. Just suck it up, man. You're a snowflake. Be stronger. Hey, would you ever tell the diabetic who has an insulin issue, hey, suck it up and get your blood sugar under control? No, you wouldn't, because it is a chemical issue. Well, the reality is that while not everybody that deals with anxiety and depression has a chemical issue, many people do. And the reality is that they need help, chemical help, just like a diabetic in many cases needs chemical. Not every diabetic needs chemical help, but there are a lot that, right? You would never tell a diabetic, oh, you're weak because you take medication for your diabetes, or, hey, buck up, man, and be stronger, right? Rather than taking your insulin for your, you would, because it makes no sense. Well, the reality is that the same applies to, it's not a matter of strength. It's not a matter of weakness. It's just, hey, I had no idea. I'm so sorry to hear that is the right response. It's not, right. So I just had to say that, like, so for somebody to say, I always saw you as strong. Strength has nothing to do with it. Right? You would never question someone's strength for, again, diabetes or for cancer. It's not, right, like a condition or cardio, like, has nothing to do with that. And so I just think that is, an important distinction for everybody.
And I think I'm really glad you say that. I really like that. Like, your take on this is important too. And another thing, and this is kind of like, I can almost bring it back full circle to that girl I was talking to, and the question I sort of want to pose to you, especially as someone, it's a question, and it's a factor of, the question revolves on the factor of time and experience. And I feel like we talked about this earlier, and I dance around these things. I hint at it. I poke at them. I tease it out, like perspective, going to new places, experience new things, try new things, broadening your horizons. So I saw, like, man, I don't want to dive in. We're wrapping up. But like, okay. I'll give you the question I asked her, and I'd love to hear, like, as a guy who's, got some years on me, she says, when you get to the other side of this, you'll be grateful. You'll be glad. And because she had a very similar experience. And when you're in it, it's like, well, when do you know you're on the other side of it? Or do you, like, when do I get to that blessed spot where everything's like, you know what? I'm glad this horrible shit happened to me. Like that. Like, what do you have any thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. While I believe that, blessings and good can come from terrible situations, I don't know if I've personally ever reached the point where I say, I'm glad that terrible thing happened because out of that came this. I certainly have not reached a point, like just with my dad alone, where I'm like, hey, I'm glad that happened because it's led to LMNOP. And so I have no answer for that. I'm sure that they're, look, I mean,
well, yeah, that's, I now that I think about, I didn't mean it in the context of your thing like that I would never say, like, be glad for that. I'd never, like, that. I want to clear.
No. I know. Like, I totally know. I totally get it. I think, look, what was the question more about, like, how do you know when you're on the other side of?
Yeah. Like, like what, like she says, well, you're going to get a lesson from this, you're going to get some new perspective, you get a new, like, outlook on life. Like, when you get to the other side, you'll be glad it happened. You become, like, a better person. And, like, I feel like the struggle is, for an acute event, like something happened and you feel like shit. And sometimes you feel like shit for like 3 months or something. Yeah. And you're like, when the freak do I get to the point where I'm like, oh, I learned a lesson and I feel better?
I don't know if you ever will. I don't think that in every look, I don't think that, there's no guarantee that in every situation that you will come out the other side better with,
Mhm.
with a transformational lesson, right? That makes you a better human being. You'll certainly come out the other side with lessons, as I believe, in any stretch of time over life. If you pay enough attention, you could come out with lessons. I don't think that out of every situation comes a better version of yourself. Out of every situation comes a different version of yourself. And it may be better, it may be worse, for
Mhm.
a temporary point. But the only thing that I would say is, how do you know when you're on the other side? When the pain is no longer impacting your day-to-day life. So for me,
Mhm.
it's much less about the presence of this aha moment and this realization of a lesson, and it's much more about, I'm no longer feeling this way. So like, I
Mm.
had a buddy who was contemplating taking some medication for, like, went through traumatic, dealing with depression, like lack of motivation, like what's it all, asking the proverbial what's it all about questions,
Mhm.
and whatnot. And he was like, hey, his doctor told him, to go on medication. And he was like, how do you know, like, what does it feel like when you are on medication? Because I take medication and have for many, many years. And I said, it's not that you feel this way. It's not that you're not going to feel euphoric and feel great and feel cloudy. You just won't feel bad.
Mm.
And so,
There's
meaning, right? Like, it's like, almost like when you hurt yourself, right? And you're in pain, to describe to somebody, like, what does it feel like when it's healed? Well, you're not describing this, well, it feels strong and thick and dense. And you're just saying, well, you're no longer in pain. You no longer have aches. You no longer, right? So the pain part
mm.
is gone. And when the pain part is gone, that's when you can start to see the potential positive that came out of it. And so you'll know when you're on the other side, when it's no longer, you're no longer feeling the weight
Mhm.
of it. You're no longer thinking about it every day, right? What happens is, over time, I feel like, and I feel like this is with most trauma, is that you go through this kind of evolution where at the beginning it's all you're thinking about. You can't think about anything else. It's what consumes you. It's all consuming. And then over time, it's less consuming. And then over
Mhm.
time, right, you get to a point where you think about it once a day, like when you wake up, right? And then eventually you start to find, wow, like, I haven't thought about that in a couple days. And then, right, eventually you rarely think about it. And so I think that that's a sign that you have healed. I also think that when, for a very long time with my dad, as an example, I couldn't talk about it. Like, I could not talk about it. And so when you find that when you think about it, it no longer triggers this a ferocious tsunami of emotion over you, that's also a sign that you're
Mhm.
going into healing. When you can begin to process it without being overwhelmed with the weight of the emotion, that's when you're on the other side. And so it's a combination of those things. When you're no longer like the pain is starting to subside, you're no longer thinking about it, every day, right? And when you do think about it, or when you do talk about it, you're no longer like pounded with this wave of just controlling emotion. And so, make sense,
Okay.
man?
Yeah, and here's my final thoughts on this. And the reason I sort of ask these questions is because while many folks may not have the degree of experience that you had, and few do, I hope, and I think it's very brave of you to talk about it here. And I hope people watching haven't had to lose someone or something that important happened to them. But I do feel like we all sort of have these moments of, you said really early on, I think in the podcast, about, trials happen and life happens. And I think everyone has that experience. And so everyone, will have something that'll feel traumatic to them. And again, some people won't experience the level of pain that you might have experienced. But I think having this idea that, you know, w- your your experience is still valid. Like if you're watching, like your experience is still valid, even if it isn't something, it isn't that someone else had a real bad experience and you didn't have that bad experience. You're not that bad off. I think it's important they hear that. They also understand that that healing probably, depending on like the duration of time, it might be like a similar experience. I remember the first time I felt like what something that you just described was I was in the shower and I was planning my day. And when I was in the shower, like I woke up, I jumped in the shower to go to start my day and work. And I was going through my head what I needed to accomplish. And it was about halfway through my shower that I recognized, oh, I'm not thinking about that sad thing. I'm thinking about work. And that was like a moment for me to be like, oh, that's nice. And the idea of, imagine, I've heard this metaphor. Imagine that like your natural state is like a childlike, you could call it, you don't have to call it euphoria, but like just sort of ignorant, like in that blissful ignorant state, like everything's golden Gucci. This is something I recognized in Peru when I separated myself from my laptop and I wasn't in my head all day. The person that I was for those, like once I got away from I felt it when I sat back down and started going into work, I all of a sudden shifted to something familiar, which was a lot more in my head. But when I was not, like I went like 2 days without my laptop, the person that I behaved like was insanely different. And so the metaphor that I've heard before is you are a hot air balloon and your natural state is sort of like floating up here in the clouds, having a good time. And what self-help often does is it teaches you how to pump more hot air in your balloon, how to like tell yourself nice things in the mirror and go exercise and work harder. And what really it doesn't ever address is you have been accumulating 1,000-pound sandbags your entire life. And you don't actually have to put any more hot in there. You don't need to put any more hot air. Because I went to Peru, I just like put everything away for like 3 days. And I was like, holy crap, I'm actually a way more fun person than I even knew. Like when I'm not in my work and looking at spreadsheets and like, damn it, why didn't this number do this? Like when I'm not doing that, it was actually, I was like, wow, I'm kind of like an 8-year-old if left to my own devices. And so one of the phrases I use in copy and I hammer into my copywriters all the time is do the least. And what I'm trying to explain to them is a lot of times the problems in copy are not actually it's what you wrote. You put hurdles in your own way when if you'd have just wrote if you'd have stopped trying to get creative, like just follow like my little bullets, like just do this thing, and just make sure you hammer those points. When you start saying, well, I got this idea, you're probably about to create a problem, a sandbag, a hurdle for yourself. And this phrase, do the least, it's one of those sort of like universal applicable lines. Like it's like the least, the minimalism of it is freeing. It lightens your load. It allows you to sort of float like that hot air balloon. You know what I mean? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, that does. That's a great, I love that, man. I love that metaphor. I dig it. I think it really is interesting, man, to think about how most people, they'd never address the anchors in their life, the sandbags in their life that are bringing them down, and they just continue to add more and more. And they try to compensate for that by really propping themselves up with kind of, fluff. And the smarter thing to do is to start to get rid of many of those sandbags. And so I like that a lot, man. Very well said. I've had a blast with you, man. I got to jump to, I got to finally get back to work, buddy, but that was a lot of fun, man. We'll have to do it again. You are, you got a lot of wisdom, man, for 33. You really do. And so continue to share it, man, with your folks, your squad. Continue to, to share that, pass that along, change lives, impact people, pour into people. And man, I can't wait to see the next year for you, brother. And so thank you for having me on.
Well, I appreciate you so much. I appreciate all the help you've done for me personally. I also appreciate you giving us this rare glimpse into Todd Brown. Thanks everyone who tuned in. I'm sorry we didn't get to questions. I actually had one pulled up and I was like, no, I'd rather talk about this. So we'll do it again sometime. Maybe we'll take questions or something. All right. Hope everyone got something out of this. I had a blast. Thanks, Todd Brown. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Peace out. Copy Squad.